It was just another long night on the road. I was driving my rig through the back highways of Nebraska, trying to make my delivery on time. The sky was pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallows everything. My headlights cut through the gloom, but it wasn't enough to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I'd been a trucker for over 20 years, and I'd seen my fair share of strange things. But this night felt different. Maybe it was the quiet. No other vehicles on the road, no sounds except for the rumble of my engine and the occasional gust of wind rattling the trailer. I glanced at the dashboard. The clock blinked 3:17 a.m., still a few hours to go before sunrise, but I was starting to feel the weight of exhaustion settling into my bones. My eyes felt heavy, so I decided it was time to pull over for a quick break. Up ahead, I saw a faded sign for a rest stop, Jake's Truck Haven, 2 miles. I hadn't heard of it before, but that wasn't unusual. These small stops popped up all over the place, especially out in the middle of nowhere. I decided to pull in. When I turned off the highway, I immediately regretted it. The road leading to Jake's was a narrow, cracked mess with weeds growing through the asphalt. The trees on either side loomed closer, as if the forest itself was closing in on me. But I was too tired to care, and I needed a break. The rest stop appeared after another mile, a small run-down diner with a dirt parking lot big enough for a few trucks. I could see one other rig parked at the far end of the lot, but no lights were on inside the cab. I pulled in, parked, and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was jarring, but I welcomed it. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, and let out a long breath. Just 5 minutes, I told myself. Then, I'll get back on the road. A tapping sound jolted me awake. I sat up straight, heart pounding. It took me a second to realize where I was, still in my truck, still in that creepy parking lot. I checked the clock. 3:43 a.m. I hadn't meant to doze off for that long. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. The sound was coming from the passenger side window. Slowly, I turned my head, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was no one. Just the empty lot and the trees beyond. Tap, tap, tap. The sound continued, more insistent now. But there was nothing there. I reached for the door lock, making sure it was secure, and then I grabbed the flashlight I kept in the cab. My hand shook a little as I clicked it on and aimed the beam at the window. Nothing. Just the glass and the darkness outside. I took a deep breath. Maybe I was just hearing things. Maybe I was more tired than I realized, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned off the flashlight and set it down. I needed to get moving. The sooner I got out of this place, the better. I started the engine, and as the headlights came on, something caught my eye. Movement just at the edge of the parking lot where the light met the darkness. It was quick, almost too quick to notice, but I saw it, something darting between the trees. My stomach tightened. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal. A deer, maybe. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I shifted into gear and started to pull out of the lot. As I did, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it, something standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. It was tall, too tall to be human, with long, thin limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew it was staring right at me. I hit the gas and sped back onto the highway, my heart racing. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it was following me. For the rest of the night, I kept driving, not daring to stop until I reached a busy truck stop just outside of Omaha. I parked, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time, trying to shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something terrible. I never took that route again. And to this day, I still get chills whenever I think about that night. Whatever was out there in the dark, I'm just glad I didn't stick around to find out. I've been a trucker for most of my life. I've been a trucker for most of my life. You spend long nights on the road, driving from state to state, and you see some strange things. But nothing prepared me for what happened on Highway 87, near mile marker 147. It was late fall, around midnight. The air was crisp, and the stars were scattered across the sky like pinpricks of light. I was hauling a load of lumber up north, making good time on a stretch of road I'd driven a dozen times before. The highway was nearly empty, just me and the occasional car passing by. I remember that night because everything felt off. It was too quiet, even for a late-night haul. The hum of my tires on the asphalt was the only sound, and it felt like the darkness was pressing in on me from all sides. I was about 20 miles from the nearest town, thinking about stopping for coffee, when I noticed something strange up ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer standing in the road, just beyond the reach of my headlights. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a deer at all. It was a person. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as I brought the truck to a stop just a few feet from them. My heart was pounding, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. The figure stood perfectly still, right in the middle of the road, illuminated by my headlights. It was a woman, wearing a thin, pale dress that fluttered slightly in the breeze. Her hair was long and dark, hanging down over her face so I couldn't see her features. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. What was she doing out here, in the middle of nowhere, at this time of night? Was she lost? Hurt? I rolled down the window and leaned out. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out. She didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, staring down at the ground. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. I turned on my hazard lights and slowly opened the door, stepping out onto the cold pavement. The night air bit at my skin, and I could hear the soft rustling of leaves in the trees nearby. "Ma'am, do you need help?" I asked, taking a few cautious steps toward her. Still no response. As I got closer, I started to notice something that made my stomach twist. Her feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering just an inch above the road, swaying ever so slightly, like she was caught in a breeze I couldn't feel. I stopped dead in my tracks, fear gripping me. This wasn't a lost traveler. This wasn't even human. Suddenly, she lifted her head. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes. Those eyes were hollow, empty, as if they'd been drained of life. She stared right at me, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like she was looking straight into my soul. I backed away, stumbling over my own feet as I scrambled to get back to the truck. I could hear her now, whispering something under her breath, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't want to. I just needed to get out of there. I jumped into the cab, slammed the door, and hit the gas. The truck roared to life, and I sped down the highway, my heart racing. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I saw her standing there in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. She didn't follow, but I could still feel her presence, like a cold weight pressing down on my chest. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, pulling into a well-lit truck stop, where the warmth of the building and the sound of people made me feel a little safer. I sat in the cab for a long time, trying to shake the image of her face from my mind. The next morning, I asked around about that stretch of road. An older trucker at the diner looked at me with a serious expression when I mentioned mile marker 147. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded, feeling a shiver run down my spine. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "That woman. She's been seen by a lot of truckers over the years. They say she was killed in an accident near that mile marker back in the 70s. Her car broke down and she was hit by a truck. Ever since then, she's been appearing on that stretch of road, looking for help that never comes." I didn't know what to say. The thought of her haunting that lonely highway, forever searching for someone to save her, sent a chill through me that I couldn't shake. I still drive that route sometimes, But I never, ever slow down when I pass mile marker 147. I've heard too many stories from other truckers who've seen her, and I've got no desire to see her again. Some things are better left in the past. I've been driving trucks for 20 years now. Long hauls, short hauls, I've done it all. But there's one night I'll never forget. It was a cold autumn evening, and I was hauling a load of furniture across the state. I had a deadline to meet, so I decided to take a shortcut through a back road. It wasn't on the GPS, but I figured it would save me some time. The road was narrow and winding, barely wide enough for my rig. Trees lined both sides, their bare branches reaching out like claws. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves. I hadn't seen another car for miles. After about an hour on the road, I noticed something strange. My CB radio crackled to life. At first it was just static, but then I heard a voice, faint but clear enough to make out. "Turn back," the voice said. I slowed down, looking around, but there was no one in sight. The road ahead was empty, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything beyond the headlights. I shook my head, thinking it was just some prank or interference. I kept driving. A few minutes later, the radio crackled again. This time, the voice was louder, more insistent. "Turn back. Don't go any further." I felt a chill run down my spine. I grabbed the CB mic and spoke into it. "Who's out there? What's going on?" There was no response. Just static. I tried to shake off the unease that was creeping over me. I've driven through plenty of strange places at night, but something about this road felt wrong. I kept driving, but the further I went, the more the road seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. It felt like I was going in circles, even though I knew I hadn't made any turns. The trees seemed to close in, their branches almost brushing the sides of the truck. Then I saw it. Up ahead, standing in the middle of the road, was a figure. At first, I thought it was a deer or some animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was tall, wearing an old tattered coat, and his face was hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. I slowed down, but I didn't stop. Something about the man didn't feel right. As I passed him, he lifted his head and looked straight at me. His eyes, they weren't normal. They were dark, hollow, like empty sockets staring right into my soul. I hit the gas, speeding past him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see him standing there, but the road was empty. Just as I started to calm down, the CB radio crackled again. "He's coming," the voice said, and this time it sounded terrified. I looked in the mirror again, and my heart stopped. In the distance, behind the truck, I saw headlights. But these weren't normal headlights. They were faint, like old lanterns, and they were getting closer. I pushed the truck as fast as it would go, but no matter how fast I went, the lights kept gaining on me. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, with no end in sight. And then, just as the lights were almost upon me, I saw it, a gas station up ahead, its lights flickering in the darkness. I swerved into the lot and slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop. I jumped out of the cab, looking back at the road. The lights were gone. The man was gone. The road was empty, as if nothing had ever been there. I stumbled into the gas station, breathing hard. The attendant behind the counter looked at me with concern. "You all right, buddy?" he asked. I nodded, trying to catch my breath. Yeah, I'm fine, just need a B-break." I sat down at one of the tables, my hands still shaking. After a few minutes, I felt calm enough to get back on the road. The attendant came over and handed me a cup of coffee. "You're not the first to come through here looking like you've seen a ghost," he said with a knowing smile. "That road's been trouble for years. Folks say it's cursed." I didn't ask any more questions. I finished my coffee, got back in the truck, and took the long way around. I never drove that back road again, and I never heard that voice on the CB radio again. But every now and then late at night, when I'm on a quiet road, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, just to make sure those lights aren't following me.